In this chapter, we've been looking at situations where we have a constant midline and a constant amplitude. And that has led us to graphs that look basically like this. Here's our midline. And then we have our amplitude, which gives us an upper limit and a lower limit. And then our function oscillates in between those two, right? Our sinusoidal function oscillates between those two values. Well, this is one way of setting things up. But in fact, it's possible to do many other things with this general framework. Instead of our midline being constant, it could be a function. Instead of the amplitude being a constant, it can also be a function. And so this gives us a bunch of different shapes that we can look at. So here's an example. If we were to have, instead of a horizontal midline, if the midline were an increasing function, and we still have our sine and a constant amplitude, well, the constant amplitude will put us above by a fixed amount and below by a fixed amount. And now the graph will look something more like this. Now you want to be careful that you're not just taking the graph and rotating it, because it still needs to satisfy the vertical line test. But you have this type of shape. Alternatively, you can have a variable amplitude. So, for example, let's say we have a fixed midline. But now instead of a constant amplitude, let's say we have an increasing amplitude. And now our function will take on a shape that looks more like this. And so both of these shapes are easily accessible from the setup that we currently have. Let's take a look at that. So right now we're looking at equations where of the form y equals a times sine, or possibly a cosine, b times x minus c plus d. This a part is the amplitude. And previously, it had been a constant. But to get something like this, all we need to do is replace that constant with some other function. And that will create this, which is sometimes called the envelope, this envelope of these vibrations. Similarly over here, this right here is going to be our midline. And so if the midline is some other function, so in this case, a line with increasing slope, but it could also be a parabola, it could be whatever we want it to be, we will still have the same underlying structure of thinking about the midline and then think about variations from the midline. But that midline will now be a variable function, variable changing with different input values, and not just a straight horizontal line here. We can also mix the two of these together. We can actually have a function with both a variable midline and a variable amplitude. So this is just to give you a bit of an overview of what else can happen with these things.